Everyone, and welcome to our Activist Appreciation Month webinars. And this is a very special feature webinar that we're doing with Lani Muelrath, and I'll tell you a little bit more about her. My name is Lisa Levinson. I'm the director of the Sustainable Activism Campaign for In Defense of Animals. And we're very excited to put together these special webinars for Activist Appreciation Month to celebrate all of the amazing work that you're doing to help animals and provide you with some special tools. And that's what we're doing today. You can find out more information and watch our replays on the website idausa.org/activist month. And that's where you can find the replay for this event. And I want to welcome everyone who's joined us in the webinar and also on our Facebook Live. Thanks so much for participating today. And we're very excited, as I mentioned, to have Lani Muelrath with us. I'm going to give you a little more information
that I have
about
planned
her.
for everyone today is I have anticipated that this slide would be up on the screen, so as people arrive, they could kind of get in the mood and arrive present with the idea. So I'm not in the practice of reading from my screen as people are on board, but since we're all joining at the same time, I'm going to read with you, if that's okay, as we open and kind of arrive at this moment. And this is a quote from Dr. Melanie Joy, who I know you just had a webinar with, correct, Lisa? If I'm not mistaken, yes?
Yes.
Okay, and she is a big advocate of the Mindful Vegan, and she wrote some portions for it. So this is from her opening portion. Mindfulness is probably the most important practice we can ever undertake. The more we are able to be mindful or present, the more we are able to feel authentically connected with ourselves and others. The ability to be present is at the heart of all healthy relationships with other humans, with non-human beings, with the planet, and with ourselves. When we are present, we relate to all aspects of our lives, including our eating habits, with greater awareness, compassion, and health. So this brings us right to the central idea that as sustainable activism, as well as being in a position to connect with others with this very important message that we are advancing, really relies on a certain presence. It's very easy to get caught up in the issues, excessively ruminate in our minds about the problems and the issues, and have this desperate sense that something's got to change. But with what mindfulness practice brings to this whole picture that we are advancing is that ability to create more presence so that we can be not only more resilient and restored as activists, whatever that looks like for us, but also to be more able to connect with the people out there in the world.
Thanks so much, Lani. We'd love to have you share more about mindfulness with us today.
Well, Lisa, I'm really so happy to be here with this sustainable activism idea, because this is one of the primary missions of the Mindful Vegan, which I call a project. I know it's a book, but I actually call it a project, because what I wanted to do was get this message into the hands of so many of us who have a little bit of an extra edge to our lives due to this concern for the other sentient beings on it and for the planet and the way it's being treated. And we'll get into all that more as we go forward. But to be able to have you reach out to me and make this connection with something that's so dear to my heart with this project is phenomenal to me. So thank you very much. And thank you everyone who has joined us today. I know everyone can't be on live, but that's how it goes. So that's why Lisa records, right, Lisa?
Exactly.
Released a new book, Life-Changing Insights from Super Soul Conversations, Wisdom of Sundays, on just about the same day as my new book, The Mindful Vegan, a 30-day plan for finding health, balance, peace, and happiness. In reports about the book launch event you hosted at your home in Santa Barbara in October 2017, I have gleaned this quote attributed to you. Everything in this book, this is Oprah speaking about her own book, comes from the spirit of what I've been trying to do here on this planet Earth since I recognized that I had a calling, she said. It's sharing wisdom in a way that opens people up to the best of ourselves, to the heart of themselves, to a more purposeful life, a life that allows you to literally get woke and stay woke. Now here's my comment going on from there. In opening to the best of ourselves, I want to applaud the fact that you had vegan options available at your brunch, attended, it appears, by some 300 people. At the same time, also served was fried chicken and waffles, a Southern culture grits bar, soul food sides, and a seafood bar with mac and cheese. Does the best of ourselves, quote unquote, include utilizing billions of animals, such as the chickens and the dairy cows and the creatures of the sea, and subjecting them to horrors of incarceration and farm management so that humans can enjoy a few minutes of favorite tastes? To me, these are inconsistent with a get woke and stay woke world. As a world thought leader, I ask you, would it not be possible to take such a simple yet fundamental step toward the betterment of our world and our humanity as to cease involving ourselves in treating other sentient beings as objects in this fashion? As a world thought leader, I ask, would it not be possible for you to advance the message of the tremendous relief to our environmental crisis the switch to veganism brings? These are the true meaning of a purposeful life. Yes, there's lots of other work to be done, which you are engaging in with your work in education and in advancing the well-being of women worldwide, among others. Yet why not step into this dimension, so easy to do, in a bigger way? The result is decreased human suffering due to relief from the cognitive dissonance of loving animals while eating them, relief from the disease-promoting potential of animal products, along with that of the other sentient beings with which we share this planet. One can start by simply being as vegan as possible. I hope that your book inspires many and that you open your heart to this other dimension and easy way of getting woke and staying woke. May all beings be healthy and happy in 2018 and beyond. Part of the reason I wanted to read this to you is because activism has a broad spectrum. And I call that reaching into advocacy as well. Every time you choose something on your plate that does not encroach on not being woke, which I'm going to refer to a lot as referenced in the letter, you are making a world of difference. And first thing I want to do is congratulate and thank everyone who has taken that step, perhaps against all odds, perhaps it was easy, perhaps it's still a challenge for you, but congratulations for being woke in this most fundamental way. We, all of us here, have this connectivity now. When we think in terms of mindfulness, we are already, by making a different choice on our plate, whether I started 45 years ago as a vegetarian and then progressed to veganism. And we've all, by this process, made a choice of being more mindful in such a fundamental way. We're more mindful of the impact of what we eat on the animals with whom we share our planet with. We're more mindful of the impact on the planet ourselves and our own health as well. And we're excruciatingly mindful of what is happening to the other sentient beings on our planet that are being objectified and exploited in this way. Now, I know you don't need reminding of this, but what I'm warming up here to is an explanation of how the mindfulness practice is so critical and crucial and a special tool to be able to create that resiliency and a way to navigate this stress that is really enormous that confronts us every day. We're also more mindful of what's happening at a bigger scale. I do a lot of my animal activist work with wild animals and internationally. So my husband Greg and I have had the privilege of traveling to Africa on several occasions where we've adopted elephants. But the problems there, which you probably are aware of, are there's so much human and wildlife conflict because of land use, the growing human population, which is causing the diminishing wildlife population, and also all of the issues with poachers, with everything from elephant tusks to rhino tusks to animal pelts. You don't need to know the list. But we all have this connectivity that is creating an enormous stress, which we need to be able to sustain a resiliency against. How can we continue to advance this cause without feeling depleted? You and I cannot unsee the videos. We cannot unsee our visits to slaughterhouses and facilities of incarceration. A couple of years ago, a team of about 20 of us here in the Northern California area took 2 vans down the state. We left Sacramento and we drove down to LA and back, and it was the Animal Compassion Tour. We stopped at every one of the major animal agriculture facilities along the way, some slaughterhouses. We stopped at some places where the chickens were advertised as being cage-free, happy, walking in and giving you their eggs, that kind of thing, and just saw the facade that is created through advertising. So the idea was there to be a witness to that. So I wanted you to know that I'm also upfront and have experienced this firsthand through experiences like that. But we can't disconnect the dots from what we see going on out there, and whether it's what people eat or other ways that animals are exploited or objectified. So how do we manage that? How do we deal with that? This brings us to just an overview of what we're going to address today, how we answer that question. This is a quote that I used in the Mindful Vegan book that I like to open with, because it also now directs how mindfulness applies. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is the power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. Today, we will address how to reduce reactivity, restore equanimity, cut through stress, and build resilience through mindfulness practice, all directed toward the special needs of being sustained as a person who is advancing the cause of animal rights. So what I'd like to do is a few things. I'm going to show you some of the research with mindfulness practice, which is tremendous amount of research now, and I'll explain a little bit of that to you. As you heard, I'm also an academic, so it's very interesting to me to find out what the science says about these practices that have the ability to restore and reconnect us to our better selves. I will tell you a little bit about how mindfulness practice has been personally beneficial to me, which I dive into a great deal in the Mindful Vegan book. And we'll have some time for question and answer. And I've also sent Lisa a link to a video that was done by Anderson Cooper, who we all know from 60 Minutes. And he did a 12-minute segment on mindfulness practices, which is a great way to kind of bring it into mainstream and shows you some of the science. So that's our plan for today. How's that sound, Lisa? We doing good with our time? Did I lose you, Lisa? Okay.
We're doing just fine. We're doing just fine.
Great. All right. So what's happened is I want to get back to this idea of between stimulus and response, there is a space. The main issue with much of our suffering in many realms of life, and not let alone with what we're doing with the advancing the cause for the animals, is reactivity. Most of us, if you look through your day, your misery, your suffering, your discomfort comes because you have reacted to someone or something through the course of the day. We are habituated to reactivity. We have not been trained otherwise. But there is a tool out there that will grow that space around having a stimulus so that you can respond more skillfully. And that's where mindfulness practice comes in. So speaking back to reactivity, let me just ask you a couple of questions, and I know I won't be able to hear your answers, but just kind of think to yourself, when we're looking at reactivity, let me give you some examples. I wonder how many people listening to this have ever experienced stress eating, or have you ever experienced or known someone who experienced like mindless snacking? Or how about, have you ever known someone or experienced yourself being compelled to zone out online, check your Facebook feed, your Twitter feed, check your email? Maybe you have a person who has been compelled to dive into an obsessive exercise program or a diet program, or maybe you're a workaholic and you can't break away from work. These are all areas that I think you will agree with me, even though they have a measure of productivity to them, can also be very stress producing and create more and more anxiety. It's almost as if we take refuge in these behaviors from this low level angst that we've got going on, which can be elevated depending on the day or depending on how much overload of stress we have had. And my point is that we all have our own canary in the coal mine. If any one of these behaviors, or maybe you have another one that comes to mind as I went down that list, that you're kind of compelled to react to discomfort, or I call them disquieting states through the course of the day, what is your way of reactivity? Is there something that is giving you a measure of pain or discomfort or dis-ease that you would like to find a way so that maybe that reactivity doesn't come up like you have been practicing for years and years, maybe even decades? So the canary in my coal mine, to give you an example, as I told you, I talk from my personal experience, had to do with food and eating. For years, probably decades even, probably about 30 years, I had what I would call a kind of disturbed relationship with food, eating, and my body. I was always on one diet or another. I was either diving into creating a new diet plan to be able to get weight off, or I was recovering from the last one by eating everything in sight. I would be, if this was a way I took refuge in this. And now that I have been through the years and I've resolved this disturbed relationship through mindfulness practice and through mindful eating, I can see how that was a way that I just took refuge from the anxieties life that we all feel. And I know that many people watching and listening today have that same food and eating experience, but I really want to invite you to look at what the canary in your coal mine is, because it will help you personalize the process of how mindfulness can help us dissipate this stress in a way and have a more sustainable life and more sustainable activism. So with that in mind, just to finish up on my own personal process, then, as Lisa told you, 25 years ago, I took up a mindfulness practice. And up until that point in time, even though, as you heard in my bio, I certainly knew all the right foods to eat. As a kinesiology teacher, which is exercise science, I certainly knew all the right exercise. But it wasn't until I put a mindfulness practice into the mix that I was able to actually dissolve that issue, find a whole new way to live more skillfully. And it also dissolved a weight problem I had. So about 20 years ago, 40 pounds left that have not come back. And I'm not pushing this idea as a weight loss plan. I'm describing this as a way to let you know that weight and food issues were one of the symptoms of a problem that was dissolved through the stress management and mindful living process that I underwent, which is what I want to share with you today. So that's what we're going to talk about. How can we use this mindfulness practice? How is it going to intervene between these points of stress? How is it going to help us with maybe the canary in our coal mine? And we may actually have several canaries. So I have a few giggles sprinkled throughout here, a few cartoons. So this is why it's unfortunate they were not live and present, because I just in a room where I can laugh with you. So obviously this sage has, okay, is that the meaning of life that way, and cheese and crackers that way. And this is the thing. The truth of the matter is, if you can be in any situation with perfect ease, if you can be in rush hour traffic and be completely calm, if you can arrive home at the end of the day, a hectic day, and just settle into relaxation without carrying everything from the day with you, then you are probably a dog. And you might have thought I was going to say you're probably a meditator or a mindfulness meditator, but I want to make it really clear. Let you read that for a second first. Mindfulness practice does not give you a trouble-free life. What it does is gives you new tools to manage the inevitable ups and downs in life. Ups and downs in life. So let's go back to the dog. Isn't the dog, we all know the dog is like the model of presence. And when we talk about presence, which is used a lot through mindfulness practice and through my teaching also, it simply means being right here, right now, doing what you're doing while you're doing it. And we know that dogs do that. All right. And we can see this in this wonderful graphic where the dog is thinking, okay, here I am sitting on my dog on this bench with my companion. And of course the human has a million things going on. But in truth, our minds and our lives often look more like this. Can anybody relate to this? Where you have just so many things, so many multitasks going on, and it's like a mountain that you can't seem to crawl out of. And it creates a feeling of, we all know the stress and sadness that just comes from too much overload. You are here, but your mind is somewhere else. All right, I told you I'd dive into the research. This is the first one I want to tell you about. In 2010, some researchers through Harvard University wanted to find out what the connection might be between wandering mind, like your mind being on a million different things, and our happiness and our peace of mind and our well-being. So they designed a study. I'm going to describe it to you. They had about 5,000 subjects. And the 5,000 subjects spanned ages 18 to 83. They had about 80 different occupations represented by this group of people. And they were from all over the world. So the point is, it was like a really wide selection of individuals from many walks of life. And this is how that research was undergone. Every one of the subjects was given an app on their phone that they would be intermittently pinged with during the course of the day. So randomly at any time of the day, they would be pinged with this app and they would be asked 3 questions. The first question was, what are you doing? The second question was, what are you thinking about? And the third question was, how happy are you? Or what is your state of being? Those 3 questions. What are you doing? What are you thinking about? And what's your mood? How happy are you? From this research, they now have over 500,000 or more responses to this. So it's kind of an ongoing project. But when they compiled the research, they came up with 2 very important results that I want to share with you. And then we will see how that relates to not only life in general, but sustainable activism. Here's the 2 things they found. They found that at least 50% of the time, our minds are wandering. That means they're traveling somewhere that is not present with what we are doing right now. There is an important reason behind why you want to encourage yourself to be more present, and we'll talk about that a little further down the road. But for now, half of our time is wandering mind. Now, this means that usually that 50% of the time is split in 2 ways. Either we're reflecting on the past, like thinking about something that happened yesterday or last week or last year, and it's usually, I'm sure you can relate to this, kind of a coulda, woulda, shoulda thing, like if only I'd said this, or why didn't I say that, or why did I say that, kind of wincing about some action we did, something we said, and living in regret over that. And the other half of that wandering mind time is projecting into the future, which often takes on the form of what ifing. What if they say this? What if they don't do this? Catastrophizing. What if I don't do the job interview right? I won't get a job, and then I'll lose my livelihood. And that's how we catastrophize easily. This is different from when you are looking at something that happened in the past to learn from it and reflecting, or planning something in the future. Those are designated mental tasks. It's the mind wandering. Have you ever had this where I just can't get that out of my head? I can't stop thinking about what she said to me. I can't stop thinking about what I said to him. I can't stop. Have you ever had that happen? Or something's coming up in the future and you can't get your mind off it. We can all relate to this loop that happens in our brains. And we don't have never been given any tools for how to not do that halfway. This is what mindfulness does. This is where mindfulness steps in. So I told you the research found two things. Half the time our minds are wandering. And they also found that, I was just checking on the time, that if without exception, across the board, that people who were thinking about what they were doing were happier than those whose minds were wandering to something else, even if they were doing something they didn't like doing. As exemplified by the pictures here. We have this guy, he's on computer, he's fantasizing about superhero. The woman's on the computer, she's fantasizing about the beach, and this computer guy's on the computer and he's on the computer. He's doing what he's doing while he's doing it. So as another example, let's say you are doing the dishes and you don't like doing the dishes, but you're actually happier if you are present doing the dishes than if your mind is off wandering with last summer in Italy or fantasizing about Hawaii. You might think, oh, I'll just take my mind off into a happy spot and get through this unpleasant task. But you're actually happier if you're doing what you're doing while you're doing it. Now, this does not mean that you have to cultivate a love for doing the dishes or that you have to love all unpleasant tasks. But the correlation with what's happening with degrees of happiness and joy in your brain are directly related to how well you are present in the present moment. This, again, is something we have not been trained to do. Let me go back. I skipped a slide here. So here's the upshot of the research, and this is all in the Mindful Vegan. By the way, you've seen the book, the Mindful Vegan book. I have over 200 research references in here that demonstrate this change that can happen for us while we undertake a mindfulness practice. So the upshot of the survey, or the research, excuse me, was a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. The ability to think about what is not happening is a cognitive achievement that comes at an emotional cost. So this is where I want to dive in a little bit deeper. Why are you happier when you are present and doing what you're doing while you're doing it? I've already described how we know now that half of our time is spent in wandering mind. This is what happens. As we unleash our thinking or just go wherever our thoughts take us, you start to move into what neuroscientists call the default mode network. That's where it's unchecked wandering mind, and you all know what that's like. And maybe many people present here today have never thought, oh, you don't have to just go with every thought that comes into your mind. How would that work? Because we're used to doing that. No one ever, I never learned this in school about, you don't have to believe every thought that comes down the pike or go with it. So here's the problem. As you just let yourself be taken over by the habit or practice of wandering mind, and I call it practice rather than habit, because your habits are simply what you practice doing all over and over again. So we've been practicing this. We've been practicing wandering mind for a long time. What happens is this very easily moves you into excessive rumination. An example is what we talked about earlier, that thinking, oh, I can't get that out of my head, what I said yesterday, what I did last week, or I can't stop thinking about this event coming up, or this animal rights conference coming up, or this demonstration I'm going to be part of, or this conversation I'm going to have at Thanksgiving. And it leads into what's called excessive rumination. And I can't say it better than that. Excessive, too much, rumination, over and over in your mind. When you cross into excessive rumination, my friends, this actually moves you into an activity area in your brain where also reside sadness, depression, obsession, compulsion, addictions, cravings. Like they're all hanging out there in that spot. And when you move in with excessive rumination, this is then its cohorts can come into play. maybe you can relate to this. If you think of a time when you couldn't get something out of your head and you started feeling kind of sad or a little let down or a little depressed. And this is the same thing. It shows up with too much time with social media or checking on emails or all of those things that are pulling our attention. You know, social media is set up on a model of distraction. Let's take their attention here. Let's take their attention there. So have you ever spent too much time on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or email and you just started feeling kind of down? Well, now you know. It's because you've moved into this part of your brain. Initially, it's exciting. It's like a little dopamine hit. There's a little bit of an addiction factor in there, but too much time, it just starts to bring you down. So this is the value of learning how to get some degree of mastery over your habits of thinking. So here's what I'm going to do right now. Let me give you the definition of mindfulness practice as I use it, because it will be instructive from here on out as we do a little bit of practice time together. I didn't mention that at the beginning, but we are going to actually do a little bit of mindfulness meditation practice together so you can walk away with a sample. Mindfulness is a specific form of mental training. That's one thing. And second, it's a particular kind of awareness that you bring to your daily activities. Now, together, this leads to reductions in reactivity and in the cultivation of positive brain states. I want to unpack the second part of that just a little bit. One, reductions in reactivity. At the beginning of our conversation, I mentioned how, and asked you the question, how much of your pain and misery and discomfort during the course of the day is because of reactivity to a person, place, thing, situation, reflecting on the past, thinking ahead to the future. Reactivity is the source of so much of that. And the other is the cultivation of positive brain states. We all have endogenous, that means innate to us in our brains, joy, compassion, equanimity, kindness, happiness, peace. They're all in there. They've just been covered up by so much that has been heaped onto us because of our busy lives, our busy minds, and our inability to get some degree of mastery over this habit of thinking that we are reacting to all the time. So does that make sense? So what we do with mindfulness practice is, as I said with the Viktor Frankl quote, you kind of grow that space between stimulus, hearing something, seeing something, anticipating something, and your response so that you can make a more skillful and more equanimous, that means filled with more equanimity, response. And the idea, my friends, is it's all in there. It's not something you have to find outside yourself. When you experience joy and quiet and peace and stillness and equanimity, it's because you have been able to drop below all of the activities that are going on in the mind. Now, before we go into our practice together, I want to give you a couple demonstrations of research that's been done around these and how this has benefited people. The first research done on mindfulness and well-being was done in 1988, and it was on a study of psoriasis, which is known as a skin condition that is a result of it's stress-related. And it was a very simple test. They had two groups. One group went through the usual psoriasis treatment, which means was UV beds, ultraviolet light, and the standard with that. And the other is they were given that same, but they were also given a meditation or a mindfulness audio to listen to the treatment. Sometimes it only lasted a short, very few minutes, but they found that over the course of the research that those people who had the mindfulness component added to it actually recovered more than twice as quickly as those who had the standard treatment. So there was some kind of an impact that opening up that space in your mind, reducing reactivity and uncovering those, unobscuring those positive states that we have had an impact. Now, this was an important study. By the way, all these research studies are really in detail in the Mindful Vegan book. because I just like to, as I told you, I like to give you the science. This was so important that this has launched now thousands of research studies on benefits of mindfulness practice. One of them in particular that I want to point out to today had to do with binge eating. Whoops, went the wrong way. Let me pause here because I skipped a slide. Mindfulness practice keeps your mind from being lost in the past or future, and it counteracts automaticity and reactivity by pulling you out of that. DMN is a default mode network. Remember, that was what the neuroscientists call our wandering mind, into present moment experience. Oh, and I forgot I had this cartoon for you. Can you relate to this? Before I tell you about the research on binge eating, let me point out here. I know we've all felt like this is like that excessive rumination. You can't quiet your mind. But I want to point out that this ability of our minds to wander, even though it gives us a lot of trouble, is also a positive evolutionary development. It's very important, as has proven to be very important for our survival in this way. If we had not been, over the last few millions of years, really highly tuned into what's going on in the environment, to danger, whether it's from other animals or from environment, or for availability of resources like water and food, if we weren't really alert and aware like that, we probably would have burned out a long time ago. So this ability to have our minds check a lot of things that are going on at the same time is really important. It's not innately bad. It simply has now taken over the process for us and can cause us a lot of pain. But wouldn't it be nice if you could decide when to go into wandering mind and when not to? When to be aware of, my mind's just wandering. Is there a way to drop below the surface of that? And yes, there is. And that's what mindfulness practice does. So the binge eating research I told you about, due to the interest of time, I'm not going to go into all of the details, although it's really well laid out in the Mindful Vegan. But the point was they had two groups. Everyone in both groups was qualified for binge eating disorder according to the scale. And half the group went through what was a usual behavioral management kind of program where they had group conversations, avoid trigger foods and trigger areas, journal, try to get healthy food in your environment, all those standard things, kind of like if you were go to a weight loss group or a diet group or another group that was helping you manage that kind of a problem. And the other group was went through mindfulness training, like what I'm going to teach you a short amount of today. That was the difference. One was standard behavior change, and one was through mindfulness practice. And the mindfulness practice people were far more successful at the cessation of not only amounts of binges, but the amount of food that would be taken in a binge. And this is because they didn't do the standard exteriors of let's manage the environment, let's not eat this foods, let's those kinds of things. They did it from the mindfulness perspective of being taught mindfulness practices, where you learn to, for one thing, learn and connect with your reactivity. So you start to see yourself in your situations and how, if the canary in your coal mine is binge eating, how there might be a little space of intervention. They also learned how to become more connected with their interoceptors. Those are, your interoception is your feelings that your body tells you, I'm hot, I'm cold, I'm hungry, I'm not hungry, I'm full. These are overridden so much in our diet-obsessed world. And this, I believe, is one of the reasons the diet world has created so many weight problems, because we've tried to micromanage what is an innate opportunity for us to be in touch with our hunger and fullness signals. We've overridden it with trying to micromanage with our heads, and it's created such a pathology. And I know there's more to binge eating than that, but this is evidence of how being more connected with your present, learning how to manage the stress of reactivity, and also be more connected with your hunger and fullness signals are very important for managing any kind of a disturbed relationship with food and eating. And the other research I want to share with you today, this is astonishing to me, and I also have this detailed in the Mindful Vegan. It had to do with smoking cessation and with two groups. Smoking. Now, we can all agree that smoking is an addiction, correct? Because I know the whole food thing is still in hot debate. Is it an addiction? Is it not? Well, we can all agree that smoking is an addiction. So would you think that mindfulness practice might be able to have an impact on something so addicting as nicotine? Well, in this research study, there were two groups. Everybody in the group, both groups, was smoking 20 or more cigarettes a day, and they all had the desire to stop smoking. So one group went through the gold standard for smoking cessation, which is the American Lung Association's Freedom from Smoking program. So it's kind of similar to the binge eating treating. In other words, avoid triggers, don't go in problem areas where you might be susceptible, do all kinds of things to support or even substitute. You've probably all heard of this, and I don't know if anybody watching this has been a smoker, but we're all aware that smokers are often told, well, just, eat something healthy instead, or even unhealthy, eat donuts or cookies, or maybe carrots or sunflower seeds, but something else to at least you're not smoking, right? So it's a healthier choice. The other group was given mindfulness training, which means that they were taught to do mindfulness practice, as we're going to do together in a couple of minutes together. Sometimes it was just 15 minutes a day over almost every day over the course of the week. And in the course of mindfulness training, as I teach it in the book and as they learned it, you also learn to navigate the sensations of your body. Remember the interoceptors I told you about, hot and cold, hunger, fullness. There are all kinds of messages that our bodies are sending us all day that we're just blind to. A body and mind are so intricately connected. They're like your body is a part of your mind, and your mind is what your brain does. And what you do with your brain, what your mind shapes your brain. And if you do some time of diving into what actually the messages that your body is sending you, you can be more connected with not only hunger and fullness, but guess what? The feelings that arise from cravings. So do you think smokers experience cravings? They learned that through mindfulness practice, they were able to interrupt the craving loop. And this is what dissolved this smoking. The upshot of this research is that those who did after 17 weeks post-treatment, those in the mindfulness training group, as opposed to those in the Freedom from Smoking program with the American Lung Association, were twice as successful at smoking cessation. 17-week follow-up. So the mindfulness training group is in red, and the Freedom from Smoking group is in blue. So yes, there was some good success here with the Freedom from Smoking, but look at with the 17-week follow-up from mindfulness training, so much higher. So the key is, without going into a deeper, and as I said, I do in the Mindful Vegan book, instead of the usual treatment of smoking, just to give you an example, whereby you get a stimulus, which might be positive, negative, or neutral, like you had a fight with your boss, or you had a good meal, or because oftentimes those are connected with smoking, or you just got in your car, which is kind of a neutral, but you have a habit connection with lighting up at that time. If the Freedom from Smoking Act would say, once that trigger occurs, well, first, try to avoid the triggers, but good luck with that. Try to avoid not having any fights or getting in your car or having a good meal. And once you did that happen, that you would do a substitute, like eat something to so you wouldn't be smoking. But the problem is, according to the mindfulness training, is that this reinforces that craving loop. It doesn't really untie it. It keeps the knot tied. The mindfulness people were trained through the practice of getting beneath the surface of the agitation of the mind and navigating the actual sensations of cravings in their body, that they could navigate them without having to be reactive so far as smoking. That's just in a nutshell, but is that exciting or what? I also wanted to point out, we've already talked about Melanie Joy, and Melanie Joy really is a big advocate of mindfulness practice, and that's as evidenced by the fact that she put something in my book, and she actually recommends the Mindful Vegan in this new book, Beyond Beliefs, and she recommends it in all of her SIVA trainings, which is the effective vegan advocacy training that she has put together that is now going international. So that's very exciting to me that she puts that in there. And Lisa, I was going to read a short paragraph here, but I'm concerned on our time. So would you rather I just move ahead and people can look up and Melanie's book on their own?
Well, you're welcome to read that. I think that goes
Okay.
along nicely with our series.
Yay, good. I think so too. Okay, so here she has a section called Cultivate. It's on 121 for those of you who have it. Cultivating Self-Awareness and Mindfulness. So I'll read this to you and then we're going to move ahead and do a little practice together. Perhaps the most important practice is to help keep ourselves and our relationships resilient are self-awareness and mindfulness. The more self-aware we are, the more we know what we think, what we feel and need, the less self-neglectful we will be. And the more mindful we are, the more present or in the moment we are, the less we are at risk of being hijacked by the destructive ways of thinking and relating that reflect and reinforce STS, or as you know, secondary traumatic stress. Of course, self-awareness and mindfulness are not unconnected. The more self-aware we are, the more mindful we will tend to be, and vice versa. And creating space in our lives is an important way to become more self-aware and mindful. If we're constantly racing from one task to the next, jumping from one thought to another, our minds are cluttered, and we cannot hear the deeper voice within us. It's also important that vegans take a break from advocating or talking about veganism, and I'm sure she talked about this in her talk with you. Often vegans feel compelled to advocate veganism at every opportunity, and while it's important to raise awareness when possible, it's important to know when not to advocate. And to skip forward, she says, mindfulness is both a practice and a state of being. Practicing mindfulness helps us become more mindful, more present, and I highly recommend the Mindful Vegan, a 30-day plan for restoring health, finding health, balance, happiness, and peace. There are different ways to practice mindfulness, but by far the most common one is meditation. Many studies have investigated the benefits of mindfulness meditation, and the correlation between mindfulness meditation and improvements in both psychological and physical well-being are significant. You don't have to meditate for long periods of time to reap the benefits of this practice. Even 10 minutes a day can make a difference. And I do want to tack on to that. This is actually a dose-respondent practice. The more practice, if we're trying to practice not just going with the wandering mind all the time and allowing those unobscured capacities those obscured capacities of calm and patience and kindness and compassion to become unobscured, then that is what the result can be. So we're going to move on to some practice here, and then we'll take some time for question and answer. But I put this up here because many of us, and I'm sure there are many here who with us today are watching this, who are already doing some kind of a meditation practice or a mindfulness practice. And if you are, wonderful, continue it. If you have in the past had some kind of meditation practice that you found centering to you and brought you back to the present, then pick it up again. But if you're looking for something, I invite you to try this out because it has been really linchpin for me in making a difference, not only in my personal life, not only, as I told you, with the canary in my coal mine, food, eating in my body, but relationships, whether through my marriage, through with work, through life in general. Very important. But we have this idea that this is what meditation looks like, right? When in actuality, it's really more like this. People say often to me, I tried meditating and I just sat down and my mind kind of went crazy. It's just all over the place. I just can't do it. Well, guess what? This is what our minds are doing all the time. We're just not aware of it until we sit down and try to become quiet, which is what we're going to do right now. In the Mindful Vegan, I set up a very clear 4-step process of simply how to start your sitting that you do whenever you do this. And I want to make it clear again that a mindfulness practice has 2 phases to it. It has a formal practice, which we're just about to do right now, which, and I mentioned this in my definition of mindfulness, is the specific form of mental training. That's what we're going to do together right now. And it's this particular way of practicing bringing your mind into the present moment so that you are not off in wandering mind. You'll get a better concentration and you'll get the ability to grow that space around stimulus and response. That is what happens with the sitting. And the other part is bringing this into the rest of your day. So that's where the dose respondence comes in. The more you are practicing this, since all of our life we've been practicing everything but this, then you can increase those moments of more presence through your day that give you greater equanimity, greater stamina, and greater resilience. I'm going to teach those 4 steps briefly right now, and we'll practice them together. Then I'll tell you a little bit more about some support and assistance as we go through the question and answer. So the first thing is the way I set up sitting practice is very simple. I'm a teacher. I also taught 6th grade for 20 years, Lisa. So I'm very skilled in taking what could be a big challenge or a complex task and breaking it down into little chunks. So for mindfulness training, for formal sitting, the formal practice, I came up with PAIR. P stands for position. So for everyone right now, hopefully you're in a place where you can be seated in a chair, or if you're on the floor, that's fine. Most of us have this idea in our head that meditation has to be in a cushion on the floor, but that's only because many of the traditions from which mindfulness meditation practice has come from, the people sit on the floor with folded legs. But we in the West are oftentimes on chairs. So a chair is just fine. And I'm going to assume that most people right now are sitting in a chair. So in the chair, just go ahead, have your feet flat on the floor, and feel your seat on the bottom of your bottom on the chair, and allow yourself to be in an elegant, upright, yet at ease position. In other words, this is not a military practice. This is not concentration at all costs. This is arriving with compassion and kindness for yourself in a place to practice this, getting under the surface of all the mental activity. Your hands can be folded in your lap or on the arms of your chair. This is basic position. This is not the time for the lazy chair, slump back in. And if you're lying down, that is another position for meditating too. You just can risk the opportunity of falling asleep. A in PAIR stands for anchor. The anchor point to start focusing your concentration is with the breath, right where it enters your body at the nose. Now, probably everybody here knows or has some idea of meditation practices and being connected with breathing somehow, right? Well, if you think about it, the reason for that is because the breath takes place right in the present. You can't breathe for yesterday, and you can't breathe for tomorrow. So by bringing your attention to the sensations, that means the feeling of the breath coming in and out of your body, you are present. Your brain will run on these tracks of either being concentrated on a task or wandering. So the minute you bring your attention to a task, right now being on the breath or anything else you do in your life outside of formal practice, you're taking yourself off that track to wandering mind. Does that make sense? So it's a way to switch off that track and practice presence. So that's anchor. In PAIR, the next is I, and that stands for intention. And every time you sit, you should set an intention of how much time you're going to be present with this practice, whether it's 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 40 minutes. And the purpose of the intention is that it kind of takes negotiating out of it, like, my mind's wandering, I don't feel like doing this anymore, because that's going to happen. But by setting the intention, you say, no, have setting the intention of being present in this process, no matter what comes up, and just returning my attention to concentration. And part of intention also is with kindness, patience, and presence and love for yourself. So many of us will start undertaking a practice and go, "Oh, I'll never get this right," or "Oh, there went my mind again." But remember, what you practice grows stronger. And as activists in this movement, and as vegans, and all of those things, aren't we advancing the cause of kindness and compassion? That starts with how you are to yourself. So you'll begin by practicing that to yourself. That's part of your intention. And then R on pair stands for remember. Every time you remember what you're doing, because your mind's going to wander, guarantee it. That doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. You remind yourself of what you're doing, and then you repeat it. So I call it remindfulness. Remember, return, repeat. So every time you discover, oh, where have I been for 10 minutes? Okay, back to concentration with kindness and patience. That's remindfulness. And that's what this practice is, everybody. That's what it is. It's constantly bringing your attention back. So it doesn't matter how many times your mind wanders, because it's the act of bringing it back that is growing your ability to grow that space. So we're going to sit together in formal practice for 1 minute together. I will time it so you don't have to set a watch. Start with your position. You're in your chair or wherever you may be, and we're going to close our eyes. Go to anchor, which is bring your attention to the feeling of the breath where it comes in and out of your body at your nose. Set the intention for 1 minute, and then let's begin. Where are you now? And gently take one more breath in and open your eyes. I wanted everyone to know also that I said I would mention some resources. My intention with the Mindful Vegan was to bring this practice to the community, as I told you early in the program, and to anyone who this might be attractive as a way to help you navigate life more skillfully and with more peace and ease and happiness. And my intention with that was to put this, that's why I put it into a 30-day plan, because I didn't want this to be like, oh, gee, that sounds like a great idea. I've read all the research. Maybe I'll do that someday. We've all done that with books and then put it away. I wanted it to be that it was broken up to step by step. So day 1 of the 30 days is 1 minute of practice. Day 2, I suggest 2 minutes, and day 3 is 3 minutes, and so on. And every day I have some of the research that backs up why you're doing what you're doing. And I also have lots of vignettes and personal reflections of people who have benefited from this experience. But I also put together, in the interest of support, 30 audios that are downloadable for free from my site. So when you get your book, in the back, in resources, it tells you where to go on the website to download these so that you can just play them at any time. And it's not required, but it's just another way of giving support to the practice. And I also have the first 7 of them are loaded up onto Insight Timer. If you're familiar with that app, you can just do a search for my name, Lani Muelrath, or the Mindful Vegan, and you can play with a few of those. So we also have some of those in the gift that we're giving away. So Lisa, I'm going to turn this over to you so that if there's some questions, we can certainly address those. I am yours.
Oh, well, thank you, Lani, so much. This has been very insightful. I learned so much during your webinar, and I'm so glad that you shared all of these great tools with us just
Oh,
to
good.
practice and to
Good.
have it
Thank you.
organized in that way with the PAIR. That's a great acronym to help us remember, and even a very manageable task, just 1 minute. That's something I think all of us can
Yeah.
practice.
Yeah.
We can all do
Well,
that for a
good.
minute a day. And all of the research was also very enlightening. And
Yeah, and
so,
that's just the edge of the tip of the iceberg, because actually there are thousands of research pieces done now on this. And this is why mindfulness is being used in hospitals and practices, thousands of them all over the world, in hospitals as stress management and as pain management, disease management, all of it.
so we can certainly use this really excellent tool as activists to help manage our own stress, because that's something that we hear a lot on our support line. We have a support line for animal activists that people can call if they're experiencing any stress, or if they're experiencing the signs of compassion fatigue. They can call us, and I'll just repeat that number in case somebody on our call today doesn't know it. It's 800-705-0425, and you can also chat with us directly online at idausa.org/activist support. So these are all great ways to kind of get connected as an activist and to practice some of the tools that Lani is sharing with us today.
Yeah. And real specific for the problems that we face. It doesn't solve the problems themselves, but I am convinced, and Melanie and I are in agreement on this too, that if we are more present in a way that means able to not second guess what the person's going to think or see where they're going. We all know that, right? Oh, I know where they're going to go with this. I know that, we get positional, and it creates so much internal stress. And whether it's accurate or not, it doesn't help the conversation. What I found is that this practice has allowed me to be much more present in conversations with people who might be adversary to me in my position on this, in a way that invites, if I'm listening, instead of being positional and reactive, it invites the same from them. And I've gotten tremendous response by being able to utilize this in real situations, this practice of communicating this with others. And if I couldn't win a heart over, at least I was able to plant a seed without getting so agitated myself. We all know what that's like.
Oh, yes, definitely. That is one of the biggest struggles that we hear from activists on our support line is
Yeah.
it's that frustration trying to speak to other people who,
How can you not get this?
yes, and dealing with the apathy of most people who aren't aware of what's going on with the animals. So I'm just
Yes.
curious
Yeah.
for anyone who's listening. We have some folks who've joined us on the webinar, and some are on the phone, some have tuned in on the computer. We also have people with us on Facebook Live. So anyone's able to ask a question. If you're on the phone, you can press *4 and unmute yourself to ask a question, or you can press the audio on button. And if you're with us on the webinar, just to ask your question or type it into the chat box. And if you're on Facebook Live with us, you're able to type your question into the comments. So just wanted to give a moment, see if we have any questions, and if not, we'll move on along. Oh, looks like we have something here. One of the questions is about sleeping. The question is, I can't sleep. I've heard the screams of the animals. I had a very brutal experience in animal activism. What can I do?
Yes. My answer is that mindfulness practice is specific for that, because this is what happens. And maybe you have, who is this that asked the question? Do you have a name?
The name is a little bit, I would just,
fine. Okay.
yeah.
Okay. If you understand that it's back to reactivity. The pain is coming from the incident itself is inspiring a horrific reaction in you because it's a horrific thing. So the real question is, how do I manage that stimulus without being so caught in reactivity that it's keeping me up all night and driving my days. So if you think back to what we were talking about with mindfulness training, is where you create a little bit of space between the stimulus and the reaction so that you can have a response. It does not mean that you deaden yourself to the experience or that you try to push it away, which is probably what's happening a lot right now. And it keeps you up because you just try to push it away, or you have the sense that I just can't do enough. I should be out there doing something about this. None of those things are practical or creating more resiliency for you or making a more effective activist, which is really the direction you want to go. So I have my hands here because I'm creating this space. When you practice mindfulness practice, you will start to be able to see how this stimulus of your experience is creating reactivity. To be present with that reactivity so that you're not either diving into its story, which is what we do when we're not trained otherwise. And that's probably what's happening here, is getting lost in the story, imagining it, seeing it again. Those are all ways that it's perpetuating the problem and proliferating it. Getting lost in story like that is one of the major problems with anxiety in any regard, and it's directly pertinent to this. So with mindfulness, you don't push it away, and you don't get lost in the story. What you do is you learn to be present with what's going on in your body, with that reactivity, that enormous stress that you're feeling, and you can navigate that directly in a way that helps you move through it and dissolve the reactivity, so it moves you out of that continual reactive state. And if we are able to do some work at retreats with this kind of thing, there are ways that you can really, really break down that process so that even if you're overwhelmed by the response of reactivity in your body, because I know how horrible it is and how much pain you feel in a tightness, that you can actually use mindfulness practices to help navigate that pain more easily and more skillfully. Then what happens as you move out of reactivity, you're able to uncover those states, those endogenous states of calm, connectivity, and compassion and kindness. And this can also then lead to a reduction in stress that is blocking your sleep.
Wow, thank you so much, Lani. That is a very comprehensive answer. And actually, we received a thank you in the chat box as well from the person who had that question. I appreciate that. Was such the perfect question to ask, because this is what a lot of activists experience. In fact, we just had a caller yesterday who asked this exact question on our support line, saying that these images from watching a graphic video, she wasn't able to get them out of her head, and she actually was having trouble doing her daily functions like working and other things because of the images that kept repeating.
So this is a tool it's the same thing, whether it's sounds or pictures. And like to recap what I said, our reactivity is either to it keeps taking us into the story of it, or we try to suppress it or take refuge in something else to get away from it. Remember, I was talking about the canary in the coal mines? Think about how many ways this may be causing problems to the rest of your life because you're not able to somehow navigate it. So you have to try to push it away by diving into something else. This is quite common, neither of which leads to a solution that helps you to be more able to manage the pain, because it's going to keep coming up. The important thing is to remember, it's not that you push it away or make it go away or unsee the images. You find it's entirely outside that realm. It's how can you have that and still be present with it in a way that makes you a more skillful activist and a better being as a human being.
Well, thank you so very much. This is a very important practice, and I look forward to bringing more and more of this to activists through our Sustainable Activism campaign. And one of the exciting things we're planning to do is host a mindfulness retreat. And we're hoping that Lani can join us. We'll be doing one in the Bay Area, and we'll probably be doing them in some different areas. So stay tuned to our events page, which is idausa.org/events. And I'm just checking to see if we have any other questions on. There's one other question I'd like to address before we close out our webinar, and that is,
Good.
can you explain intention briefly? What does intention mean for you?
Is that in reference to pair, position, anchor,
Yes, I believe so.
intention? The intention part of pair, and if you want more answer to this question, that's fine, but I'll start there, means you're setting the intention of, one, I'm going to do this sitting for 5 minutes. So you're sending the message to yourself that even though I don't feel like doing this, or I do feel like doing this, no matter what goes on in my mind or my body, my intention is to continue to bring my mind back to the present moment, because that's what I'm doing with this. I'm practicing not being lost in thought, not wandering mind, not being obsessed and pulled away with one thing or another, which is, we've just given 2 really examples of it. So that's half the intention. And the other half of the intention is that you bring to it the intention of being kind and patient and compassionate with yourself. This is a loving practice. There's even a whole meditation that comes up later in the Mindful Vegan called Loving Kindness Meditation. And we do that for ourselves, for others, and for the animals. And I would certainly bring that into a retreat situation. It's a wonderful practice. But that the intention is not to bring some kind of militancy or a fight to it. Remember, what you do, what you practice is what you become. So we want to practice the same thing. That's the baseline of what we're doing with animal rights activism and veganism. And that is kindness and compassion. That's right. That's intention. So I hope that answered the question.
Beautiful. Yes, and that was the question. That was related to the I from the pair. And I like that, even connecting that to the body, because you mentioned earlier that when we are sitting, we don't need to be very rigid, but we want to be gracefully sitting upright. And so that's also bringing that sense of kindness into even how we're sitting as we're meditating.
That was perfectly said, Lisa. I could not have said that better. This process is just, it's bringing willingness and curiosity. And then people say, oh, look, I'm bringing attention to the practice and, get on themselves. We always find ways to get down on ourselves, but it's an invitation to open our hearts in that fashion. So yeah, very nicely put. Thank you.
Well, thank you again, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. This has been a wonderful part of our Activist Appreciation Month offerings, and you can find the replays, and also we have a special self-care resources and compassion fatigue resources that we developed just for this month for activists, and you can find all of that at idausa.org/Activist Month. And it was truly an honor to have you on board. I'm so excited that we connected and that we're able to bring these great resources to our activists and listeners to our webinars. And
Thank you,
I look forward
Lisa.
to it.
Yeah, I'm just really honored because, like I told you, this was one of my part of the volition of this project, which is what I call the Mindful Vegan. It's a book, but I call it a project, as evidenced by what we've done today, was to bring this message into the hands of hearts of this very special population of people who are care in such a way that is growing and growing, and hopefully we will grow more. But it's incumbent upon us to really develop that resiliency and to do the self-care and pay attention to compassion for ourselves, because that's how it translates to others. And I want to point out a couple of other resources. This picture I have up on the screen, if we're still shared screen, remember I promised there would be a link to, it's about a 10-minute video with Anderson Cooper, which is very interesting because he actually shows what's happening in your brain when you drop under the surface of this mental agitation. And he goes to a 3-day silent retreat, and it shows what he experiences as a person who's kind of addicted to his cell phone and Twitter and whatnot. So that's very interesting. And also, Lisa, are you not providing a link to the gifts I have?
Yes, I shared that with the participants. So for anyone who's joined us on the webinar, they have a link to that video. And I also shared it with our Facebook Live listeners. So everyone has a link to that. They can tune in and watch that.
Okay, because I do have that 40-page download of the beginning of the Mindful Vegan book and 2 sample audios that we can send a link to, so people can kind of jump in right away and get a taste. So
wonderful, and I think you can find that on Lani's website as well. So, and her website is her name, which is LANI Muelrath.com. So you can find these resources on her website. And I hope that all of you have an opportunity to read the book, The Mindful Vegan. I'm enjoying it thoroughly, and I look forward to diving more into these practices. So thank you so much, Lani, for joining us, and to everybody for being part of our Activist Appreciation Month celebration. Stay tuned for more.
My pleasure, Lisa.
Hey. Thanks to everyone. Have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.